I thought this would be a good venue to talk about some of the stuff we've been discussing recently,
Hmm.
which is these myths and misconceptions and maybe some false advertising, or maybe that's putting it a little too harshly. Just kind of the idea that just because it says something on the box or it says something in the product set feature list,
Hmm.
it's not always as maybe true in real world scenarios.
You talking about Amazon?
Well,
Like
you were talking about
you're,
lighting
I was
specifically.
talking about lighting. I thought you were referring to you were just on Amazon and the product images weren't accurate. Like they weren't the same product in every photo, which we both know that like the Photoshop that happens on Amazon can be pretty outlandish at times.
Yeah, sometimes there's certain products on Amazon that are just listed incorrectly, but no,
Hmm.
I wanted to talk specifically about a little bit more technical stuff. You
Hmm.
were describing lighting and some experiments you were
Oh,
doing
yes, yes.
with, power ratings versus using
Intensity.
in modifiers.
Yeah.
Yeah, so just explain a little bit of that.
So I mean, over the years, obviously lighting has gotten a lot better. The issues we ran into 10 years ago don't exist anymore, thankfully. Technology's come a long way, LED lighting.
Powerful
Um,
lights used to be really hot
right.
and almost dangerous.
Yes, and like the bulbs itself, like they were very fragile.
Can't touch them.
No, have to let them cool down before you pack them up.
Or we'd be using fluorescents that are also very
Yes,
fragile.
yeah, and especially traveling was just a very dangerous situation you could get into because you don't know who's necessarily going to be handling the lights.
We
Um,
broke many fluorescent bulbs back in the day.
TSA would love to break our bulbs. I'm assuming they didn't do it on purpose, but
No, no, of course
it's
not.
we did our best to try to pack everything so they wouldn't break. But nowadays we don't really run into that issue. Most lights have a very large LED chip, so it's something that you can't necessarily break. The housing, however, is something that you can break depending on the build quality. The more professional lighting is like made of metal, typically lighter weight metal. So the lights that we typically run with are like Aputure lights, which I'm sure a ton of people are familiar with. And then they came out with another brand called Amaran lighting. So it's a lot of like more plasticky parts, but still pretty well built. And as long as you're not rough with them, they will last. So very powerful lights. And in everyone's trying to get the most power because a lot of situations you want that, and it's sometimes, especially with different lenses, like if you don't have a really fast lens you need a lot of light, right? So everyone's always trying to find the most powerful light, and especially with traveling you want to find like a compact light, right? So
Which
trying to
usually for
find,
us has been like finding the powerful light because we're competing with daylight. Often
yes,
there's a
yeah,
window or something, so we need to
hmm,
bring up our ambient
right, if you
light
don't,
in the interior,
mhm,
because even with NDing windows and like
yeah.
all the stuff you can do, it's just nice to have more power in a light.
Yeah, the more power, the better, always. And then you can get into like more technical things. Like if you're shooting like slow motion, you need even more light, right? So it's very it's an uphill battle. But nowadays they make very powerful lights that are pretty affordable. And
I think when Aperture came out with the 600D, that like
mhm.
blew my mind.
Oh yes,
It's
yes,
just
so
imagine
much power.
because it started. I think the first Aperture lights we had were the 120s,
Hmm.
and then we got the 300s,
Yeah.
and then the 600 came out. We haven't gone into the 1200 territory. You've used
No,
them.
I've been around them. They're very like the best use case would be shining them from outside inside, so creating more of like a natural light look
A fake
that
sun.
is controllable. Yeah, because if you have that inside, it's very unpractical to have something like that, which like you can bounce it and make it more like a soft source of light as long as you have the right equipment, but it takes up a lot of space.
Yeah, that
So
was kind of the breaking point for me when I looked at the
mhm,
1200. I was like, I would love to have that power,
mhm.
but it finally reached that breaking point where the size of it became a little bit too
It's
cumbersome. Where the 600
huge.
is
Yeah.
is big,
Hmm.
but it's not too big,
Right.
and it has enough power for
Yeah.
most situations.
And you need to think of the accessories you need outside of that because like not a regular C stand should be used with that kind of light. You need something a little bit beefier usually. And then depending on how you rig it, it could be closer to the ground and point it up to bounce, and that's nice. But it's not anything that we've necessarily had a inkling for.
It's probably
it's a little
something
bit
I
too
would
much power.
rent if I needed it for
Yeah.
a specific use case. But for day-to-day applications of just a light to have for general
Right.
purpose, I think the 1200 is probably
Yeah,
overkill.
and a 1200D, which is just one color daylight,
Daylight.
and so it kind of gets into this like testing that I was doing because now Amaran has like a new versions of lights, the C version, so like color, so it's like full spectrum, so it's not just daylight, and it's not part of their X series, which is like tungsten and daylight, so it can go like warm to cool, but not necessarily any other color,
Right.
like
The
hue.
X is bicolor, but the C's are full RGB.
Yes. Yeah. And it's really nice because with the app, I don't know if this is now like an advertisement for
Sure, it
Aperture
can
or
be.
something. But
We like the aperture lights. We like
oh
the
yeah,
Amaran lights.
it's fantastic. But here's something that I don't really find people talking about this one specific thing, which is for as much as like you can research a light and see how powerful it is, you can see like the color rating, and everyone talks about like, oh yeah, this is like great, most accurate light ever. But everyone, depending on your lighting modifier, like that can change the color quite drastically, especially if you're trying to be very accurate. It's not drastic, but it is when you actually, do like a color reading because you're like, oh wow, that's like a few hundred points off. So it's definitely an issue, especially like some of the stuff we do, which is like food videography. So colors need to be accurate. And if you're trying to mix in, all these different lights, and then you don't necessarily know what the light's going to look like bouncing off the walls, depending on, what color your walls are. So a lot of different things. So I had
You're,
like
you're
a,
describing a scenario where you buy a light that says is rated, this is a daylight light and it's 5300 Kelvin. And then the moment you shoot that through diffusion or you put a
any
modifier in front,
any lighting modifier,
right, anything
because
in front,
any like material is going to change it a little bit cooler, a little bit warmer,
a little bit
but
more green, a little bit more
right. So
magenta.
you can dial it into 53, but then when you do like I have this the color meter, like a what is it, Sectronic? How do you pronounce that name?
Saconic, maybe?
Sectronic?
I don't. I forget the
It's like
brand
one of those
name.
things where like you could see Chick-fil-A all the time, but then it's like, all right, spell Chick-fil-A. You're like, wait, how do you
I
spell
think it's Saconic.
Chick-fil-A? Seconic. So color meter, so you can get an accurate reading, and it's one of the tools that I use most often now because it's just a really good way to make sure every light is exactly what it should be, or at least they all match accurately. So you put on the lighting modifier and then you test it, and then you figure out that it's like, oh, this is a few hundred degrees off of what I dialed it into. So along that road, I was just kind of curious as to like intensity wise. And when you read it, description, it's usually like the lux amount of like the intensity power, and it'll say like at 1 meter away. And all the tests usually are done with like the cone that comes with the light, and each cone is developed for that light specifically in order to, it's like a reflector cone in order to make that light as powerful as can be, which is great, but it's never how I use those lights. I never use those cones. Like I never bounce it into like a big board, mostly because like the way we do like our shooting, a lot of it has to be like packed down, so I can't necessarily bring huge white boards all the time, and there are other solutions, but the way we travel, it just too big. Like I don't want to bring like an 8x8 or 12 by anything like that. So a lot of the times we'll have like these lighting modifiers that attach directly to the light, and
And
what
packed down nice and small.
oh yeah,
Fits in
and
like a suitcase or
yes.
some kind of travel luggage.
So when you start using these lighting modifiers, then you kind of figure out that like, oh, because it doesn't have that cone reflector, it's not going to be as powerful. So then I'm like, well, what is apples to apples? So then I, started taking out the 200X, and because it's bicolor, I was figuring like, oh, of course it's going to be less intense than the 200D, for instance, which is like one whole chip of just daylight as opposed to splitting up the chip, right? And then, of course, I know you probably know this with bicolor lights, depending on, if you go full tungsten or full daylight, it won't be as powerful as if you go right in the middle.
Because you're getting both.
So
Yeah.
you get a little bit of both, and then it's even more powerful, right? So a little nuance there. But um, like like I said, with the testing, putting the same lighting modifier, huge, you know, typical lighting modifiers. Recently, I've actually been using umbrellas because the Amaran lights actually have a little port where you can like shove a huge umbrella, which is great because then makes my kit even that much more compact. But
Yeah,
like I
those
said,
umbrellas tend to fold up a little smaller than like a softbox
oh
would,
yeah, softbox it takes up like a quarter of the amount
or the
of
domes or the
real estate.
lanterns.
So like I said, 200X had it on. It was like a cool 200D, same lighting modifier, and I have like the color passport, color checker chip chart, and I'm looking at the waveforms. Like these are exactly the same. It's like depending on what I was doing, and it's just daylight. 200X set to daylight, and then the 200D daylight, same. 50%, 100%, going through all the ranges, looking at the waveform, and if it changed at all, like minimal, like microscopic amount. But then, of course, like I said, when you read the chart, it should be much different. But in reality and practicality, not much different at all. So in my mind, I'm like, all right, so this 200X, let's compare it then to the 300D because that should be much more powerful,
The
right?
300D Mark II.
Mark II. So yes, it is more powerful, but by how much, right? So that's why I kind of wanted to check it with the chip chart. And after doing all the tests, I figured that it's only really like at most like a third of a stop brighter, which I would have assumed it would have been way brighter. But I'm assuming if I would have used the reflectors, which I did put on the reflectors, it was much brighter. But like I said, those reflectors are designed to make that light brighter. But if you're not using those reflectors, it's going to react much differently, especially when you're using that light to kind of bounce, especially if it's depending on the modifier you're using, if it's double diffused, everything like that. So what I've come to find is that a lot of these lights they have like a similar intensity depending on how what kind of lighting modifier. So to me, I was kind of left thinking, wow, these aperture lights, the Amarans are much more valuable than they lead them on to be because a lot of people think it's like, oh, well, it's a lower tier product. It's not professional. It's not nearly as powerful. Look at the chart. It's like, well, if you actually do like a practical test using equipment that you use, and maybe that's like the the moral of the story. It's like you really need to do your own like testing because you can't necessarily rely on, I'm sure we both rely on YouTubers to do the testing for us a lot of the time because it takes time and money and time is money, especially when you have jobs lined up. You don't necessarily have the time to play around all the time or get the newest equipment. So it is beneficial, but if you have the time, definitely do your own testing because there's only one way you're going to find out if your gear works the way you want it to. So like I said, I just found it super surprising that this 200X is so powerful, and now I don't know, it makes it much more of a justified purchase.
Right. And that's aside because you've talked about the build quality, the materials, some of the weatherproofing that's on the more expensive
Yeah,
aperture lights. But the Amarans, in terms of just pure output, perform almost
yeah,
indistinguishably
yeah.
similar.
And like I said, we're talking about like a third of a stop, right?
Right.
It's like, is it really like, are you losing that much in a controlled environment? No, not at all.
Right.
It's only when, of course, you're forced to shoot outside when you're considering the lighting that actually has, weatherproofing. But in a controlled environment, if you know how to take care of your gear, you're going to make a much better investment, going with lighter gear. Like think of the benefits that you have outside of, the build quality, but also consider the build quality when you're like, well, if I'm traveling with this, it's going to be much lighter. So,
Right. Which is kind of the funny, ironic part. Like even the new Apple Vision Pro has like,
mhm,
it's glass and metal and it's premium materials,
yeah,
but it also makes the thing heavier,
right.
which is not always what you want with
No,
a VR headset because you
right.
have to
You're
wear the
going to wear
thing.
it. Yeah.
So that balance between do I need the durability or do I
Mhm,
need it to be kind of lightweight and more portable?
yeah.
And that's really very subjective. There's no right answer.
It's extremely subjective. And right now, I don't know, I'm kind of waiting to see what Aperture does do with like their more premium products because as of now, the lower tier products are more color accurate, especially now that they have the full spectrum of color to work with. And I
You're
really
talking about the
enjoy
C models,
the
like the
C models.
150C or the
But
300C.
even the bicolors, they're even better. I know they have like another letter that they attach, the S, which
What's the S stand for?
I'm Couldn't tell you. Can't remember. But
Speed,
speed,
sync? Is it
it's more accurate color. I know that,
Oh.
but couldn't tell you what that's. It's like most of products nowadays. It's just like we're just gonna throw numbers and letters at things because it's different. I'm sure it has much more of a meaning than I'm leading on, but it's more accurate. So I'm
Okay.
kind of waiting to see if the higher tier goes into creating like full spectrum color, because I really enjoy using the app and their what is their app
Sidus
called?
Link?
Sidus Link, yeah. And with that, there's a feature where you can use the camera and like point it at something. So if you do have like daylight coming in, it's like I'm going to take a photo of that wall and match that color exactly.
Oh, nice.
Which then again, you kind of have to dial it in, tweak a little bit, but it gives you in the ballpark
Close
of
enough.
like what, okay, I'm going to match the room instead of being in a situation where, and I don't know, we've had to deal with this a lot, where some windows are like they have like a tint to them. It could be very green, could be very blue. But if you match that light like 1-to-1, then you can get like perfect, white balance theoretically.
Which I think a lot of glass does tend to be green,
Yeah, a lot greener, yeah.
which I don't know if that's a thing in manufacturing, if you can pick the type of glass that's being made, if it has a different color or whatnot.
I
But
know
definitely the thicker the glass,
yeah.
you notice more of that green hue.
Yeah. So it's if you can match that, it makes the whole room look consistent and a lot less work in, post production trying to figure out just picking the background or, one wall and trying to figure out like a hue correction. So
Well, it's good to do your own testing, because even when they'll say on the product page, like 50% brighter or, 25% more power,
yeah.
it in certain environments, yes, that is true, maybe scientifically when you measure it in a certain condition set.
Yeah.
But in practical day-to-day use, you might have something that gets you most of the way there, and you might expect, oh, this will be twice as bright or 3 times
Right.
as bright, and it actually isn't.
Yeah.
When it comes down to it.
And it is quite humorous. There have been times where we've used the 600D inside at 1%. So it's you definitely have to know what job you're going to be doing and then figure out the correct tool for that job. And for a lot of the stuff we do, especially when we're, like I said, traveling or flying these lights overhead, which we have 3 overhead right now, if they're made of plastic and a lot lighter, it's going to be a lot safer. It's going to put everyone at ease. You don't have to like load up a stand with sandbags or anything. Which obviously some sandbags, but not enough, like, how much you would actually need.
Yeah. No, you were telling me this, and it just reminded me of something that came up recently on the channel with people's comments, because it's funny, for as much as I've talked about it, not a lot of people have talked about it. So I think it's a misconception out there that when it says on the product page that this is 4K, people think that all 4K is the same, and it's really not.
Yeah.
It comes down to so many factors. You have compression ultimately, right? Is it H.264? Is it ProRes? How are you storing this data? What compression is being applied? That's going to affect your resolution, even though it's 4K. The file will be 3840 by 2160.
Yeah.
The resolution is there, but the detail's not. It's not
Right.
real resolution. And then you have the step back from that. Okay, how is this camera sampling from its sensor?
Yeah.
Because back in the day it was pixel binning, and they would just throw data away and they'd average pixels, and then you get aliasing, moire, and all the stuff that is kind of gone, not really as much of an issue as it used to be. And then even one step back from that, you say, okay, well, I'm shooting raw, so it doesn't matter. And it's still the sensor itself. A photo site, I don't think a lot of people realize this, like a photo site is not a pixel. A photo site is either red, green, or blue, and almost every camera uses a Bayer pattern on the sensor, and they're averaging pixels. So they're taking some of the red, some of the green, some of the blue, finding the overlap, and combining to basically give you all the pixels you see. But a raw photo or a raw video is not truly as much detail as even theoretically as possible, real resolution, in that from that sensor, because the sensor itself doesn't have real full pixels.
Yeah.
They're kind of being created. So what's funny is that I get comments from people all the time, not all the time, but sometimes it comes up. They'll say, well, of course it looks more detailed because it's a higher resolution sensor. This was in the GH6 versus the A7S3. Like
That's not true. The new A7S3 has 12 megapixels compared to my,
Well, it's 12 megapixels, but then the GH6 looks more detailed because it's 25 megapixels. And my point is not, it doesn't matter. They're both recording 4K, and there's a theoretical amount of total resolution available in a 4K file.
Yeah.
If you start with more resolution to begin with, 25 megapixels on the GH6, and you sample that down to 4K, it should be more detailed. But that to me is 4K.
Yeah.
When you say an A7S III is 4K, but it's coming from 12 megapixels, and you don't really know how it's processing the data, you don't really know what the compression's happening, and I look at it and I go, this looks kind of soft. Like there should be more detail here. And it reminds me of back in the day when we did all the Canon testing with the 5D Mark II and the 5D Mark III and the 5D Mark IV. Oh, it's 1080p. It's a 1080p camera. That's all you need. It's good enough. It's HD. There is so much more detail in some of these other 1080p files or these 4K files, however you want to slice and dice it. And I wish more people talked about that, because just because it says 4K doesn't mean it's actually 4K.
Yeah. And I mean, I don't know. You can get into nuances with even cameras where you're like, okay, yeah, it shoots 4K, but it's cropped. You know, or whatever. It's like, oh, well, it's like, oh, well, you're not even going to use my full sensor? Okay. But
which can be an advantage in certain situations if you want less rolling shutter artifacts. It's easier and less noticeable.
Yeah. Or stabilization is a lot of times why they'll crop in a little bit. It's like, oh, but it'll be stable. It's like, yeah, but it's not the full resolution.
Yeah. It really depends on what your preferences are and your priorities are. I just find it, I don't know. I don't know what the terminology is. When you say, I don't like this because I expect more from it. If it says it's 4K, I want sharp, clear, true resolution 4K. Not kind of this like blurry, soft,
be 4K.
A little bit 4K. Like
I can shoot something at 1080, bring it in Premiere and export it at 4K.
Absolutely,
You know?
right. Exactly.
Yeah, so anything can be 4K.
Yeah, 1 pixel can be 4K. You can make an entire 4K of just a white pixel, and you could do that. But people don't process that as much, I feel like, when they're buying a camera and they say it's a 4K camera, it's the same.
Yeah.
These are the same. I go, no, they're not the same.
These are the same. Yeah. I mean, your iPhone shoots 4K.
Yeah, it does. And then even the difference in the lenses. So on my iPhone, it's got the 3 lenses. It's got the ultra wide, the normal, and then the telephoto.
Yeah.
If I shoot video with the ultra wide, it looks worse than the normal lens. Both 4K, both 24. Like, I'm not changing my settings. It's just the lens, and then how that data is processed, which I'm sure is a disclaimer somewhere. They say, oh well, it's actually working this way with this camera, or, the megapixels. I don't know how it works, but you can look at it and go, well, these two 4K things are not the same.
Yeah,
and this one looks better.
Yeah, I don't know. It is frustrating using my phone camera every now and then. You're just reminding me of every now and then. You'll pull up your phone, and depending on the distance, you can have one of the 3 cameras selected. But depending on your distance, it'll like, oh, do you want it to be macro or whatever? It's like, no, it's like, let me choose what I want, but it's trying to make it easy. But by making it easy, it may make it look a lot worse, right out of nowhere.
And there's some trickery going on with the iPhones specifically that I've noticed, where they will, to create the image, they'll be blending 2 different lenses at the same time.
Whoa. I didn't know about that.
It's a little weird, and then there's not a good way to show it in this format. But if you just go to your camera app and you pull up like a lens, like you can cover each lens, right?
Yeah.
So with my finger, I can cover the lens,
force
to see. Okay, so which lens is this using?
Holy moly.
And then if I cover that one, it's like, okay, that's the one it's using. So if I switch to the 3x,
don't use that.
The telephoto is still using, you can kind of figure out like, oh, it's using a couple of these lenses for the same thing. Yeah, based on just blocking each one. See, what did it just do there? It goes from like black to
transition. This lens never used this lens.
Yeah, so you can kind of see how it plays and the trickery that it does, and how it switches, automatically between them. And you go, no, I actually want to.
Yeah, I don't know.
I want more control. I don't want it to be automatic.
Yeah.
But I have used the Blackmagic camera app now that's on the iPhone. That works quite well, actually, for a manual camera. It's a free download, and you can record ProRes right on your iPhone with the Blackmagic camera app, which is great.
Yeah, I've seen the Blackmagic camera app. That's everything. Well, we've both had experience shooting on Blackmagic, but it is nice to see that full menu. It looks like a little like monitor that you would have on your actual, Blackmagic camera. So I'm glad that they put that in there, and so many features too, even like false color is in there. So I'm like, this is everything I would have wanted.
All the manual overrides. You can even pick the audio source, which is not easy to do in the native iPhone app. Which microphone am I using? How can is it my AirPods? Is it the one I plugged in? Is it recognizing that? How do I know for sure? The Blackmagic app, you can actually say, pick this input. And it's a lot. I feel like I have a lot more. It's just more reliable when you have that level of control, and it's easier to make mistakes because it's up to you and human error.
Right.
So don't make mistakes.
Yeah.
But given that control is a lot more valuable, I think, if you want to use your phone to record things.
There's one thing I want to touch on that I never said how much those lights actually weigh. So I was,
Oh, yeah.
and there is a reason, right? Especially when you're traveling. Like we fly Southwest a lot, and with media badges, we're able to up the weight on a large oversized item from, I think it was 50 pounds up to 100 pounds. So especially if you're traveling with tripods, lighting gear, things that are heavy, pounds add up extremely quickly. And even like the case itself can be pretty heavy too, so it's a lot to factor in. And we've had cases in the past that have just broken immediately. Now we use cases that are much more sturdy. So when I was weighing the 300D with everything, the like not just the light itself, but the like everything, all the wires that come with it too, like
The ballast box.
the ballast box and everything. So that was around like 15 pounds versus the 200X with everything combined. It was about 5 pounds. So I'm like, oh my goodness, I'm saving 5 pounds of light, so I could, have much more
So three
lighting
times
power.
3 times the weight, but only a third of a stop in terms
Difference,
of brightness.
yeah, power with my lighting modifiers that I typically run how I light. So that alone, I was just like, oh my goodness, this is so much justification for buying these lights. Which I've never had an issue with those lights. We've run these so often and so like full power all day practically for a lot of the lights, and we've had them for years at this point, maybe 2 years I've had mine. So I don't know. I really appreciate Aputure. Like I've so much love for that company. But it is nice that there are a lot of other competitors now too. Like I know Godox is now making a lot of lighting, which is great. There was that what was that company? C or GVB? Is that the at NAB?
GVM?
GVM, yeah, that's the company.
Yeah,
Which
a good video maker.
yeah, good video maker.
I think
And
are great.
Which the last time we
Great
went to
video.
NAB, like they had like really nice looking stuff.
Sure.
It looked strikingly similar to Aputure
yeah.
lighting, but I remember their first lights that they had. You had purchased one years ago.
Amazon.
Yeah, and it looks it looked like a knockoff.
Yeah.
Like does this even work? But now comparatively, it's like everything looks so much more professional. So it's just nice to see so many people contributing, to like giving us the best tools to use, especially if you're traveling.
Yeah, that's the kind of interesting thing about Aputure and DJI is they started as these foreign brands with kind of cheaper products that were
Yeah.
more like, oh, that's not professional.
Yeah.
And both of those companies have become the professional standard.
Because what was it before? It was like, oh, you don't have a Kino flow?
Kino flow, right?
You don't
Which
have
no one
Kino?
I don't know anyone talking
No
about
one
Kino
talks about
flows.
Kinos anymore. Yeah.
Because
Oh,
they were
man.
so expensive, and Aputure came along and was like, "Yeah, we do LEDs, and they're way cheaper, and
Right.
they're better, and all those reasons." And then it slowly just devoured the entire industry. Where now almost every set is full of Aputure lights. In the drone world, everyone's flying DJI for the most part, and it's just become the new norm.
Yeah.
Where 10 years ago, that was kind of like the new kids on the block making some cool stuff, making waves, going like, "Oh, that's not airy.
Yeah.
What are those lights?
Yeah.
Oh, these are Aputure.
Yeah, it is.
What is that?
Interesting how you really need to capture like the young up and coming market, and if you do, like you can ride that wave as a company. And I guess cameras obviously have been around for a lot longer than newer lighting, right? And it made me laugh. I was watching a YouTuber talking about like the best cameras, in today's day and age, right? And of course, you're talking about Sony, you're talking about Lumix now, you're talking about Canon, and he was like, and Fujifilm, and oh, I almost forgot Nikon. I forgot even they made cameras. Oh,
That's how I feel.
but in the very beginning, or at least back when I was getting started, Nikon was like on the forefront of making 1080p HD video accessible at a full frame, make it look, cinematic. So they were like on the forefront, and then all of a sudden, fast forward 10 years, like everyone's forgotten about them. Like, do they even make cameras anymore? Kind of thing. So, like I said, it is nice just to have like people contributing to this industry, at least for people like us who enjoy, the craft of making content.
Yeah, and I think that for me, my perspective, when maybe we disagree on the Sony side of things a little bit, I think we more or less agree. But I feel like Sony has captured so much attention in the hybrid space because of autofocus. Like
Yeah.
full frame autofocus was like the winning thing for the longest
Oh,
time.
it still
for
is.
why you would pick Sony.
Yeah.
I guess the A7S II was kind of low light specialty, but then everyone kind of caught up with that as well. And what's funny is that drug, full frame autofocus, got all those people invested in Sony, and they don't even realize all the features they're missing that they don't have. Things
Right.
like open gate, things like shutter angle.
Yeah.
Those are the ones I harp on the most. And they go, well, like, why would you go with Lumix? I'm like, Lumix has full frame and autofocus phase detect, all the stuff that you like, but also these other features you don't even know you're missing.
It's just for me, because I do obviously very much enjoy all those aspects shooting Lumix, but we are both familiar with the Micro Four Thirds system. So we do shoot open gate and we crop horizontally and vertically, depending on, what platform we're uploading to. And it is extremely efficient, super beneficial. It doesn't look obviously like a full frame, shallow depth of field camera
Right.
looks initially. Like you can,
But you can get that now
work
with
to get
Lumix.
there. Oh yeah. Now they have full frame and everything.
And those have phase detect. They have all the things that for the
But-
longest time, Lumix for
But
the
their
longest time.
lens selection is pretty abysmal. But something I did see, and I don't see a lot of people actually doing any real tests, and maybe this is something where I'm going to have to get something from Lens Rentals or something.
You're talking about L-mount lenses?
L-mount lenses, but I want to be able to adapt. I know you can adapt different glass, to L-mount. So I don't know. Maybe that's an option. Who knows? But yeah, the L-mount glass that I've seen, not the fastest. I think like a 1.8 on most of their primes is pretty good. I'm just used to obviously shooting Sony where I have like access to like a 1.4, 1.2, like all these like really, really fast lenses. So it's just that investment thing of I'm already so invested in like all my Sony glass.
And you were saying that it's much more common in the field. So if you're working with other people who are
Yeah.
also shooting Sony, it's a very easy way to integrate.
Yeah,
it's,
people demand that look.
well, and
The
they have
Sony workflow.
Sony was smart in that they merged their kind of professional line with their consumer line. Not merged, but
They're pretty
operate
close.
side
Yeah.
by side. So where you can get something like an FX3, an FX6, an FX30, or you can shoot with an A7S3, an A7 IV, and they're all kind of playing in the same realm. It's just what features do you want? Whereas Panasonic and Lumix was totally separate consumer.
Yeah.
And then the Panasonic mainstream kind of stuff, the VariCam or the EVA or the DVX200 are like so separate and foreign from Lumix.
Yeah.
I think the branding has always been the hardest part in the way they've divided those teams versus even Canon has cinema EOS and then consumer EOS.
Right. I would.
Is it EOS or EOS? I always forget. what
I don't
people
know.
say.
I've
I
always
say
said EOS, but
EOS.
I've heard people say
The
EOS.
5D Mark IV EOS
EOS.
EOS 5D Mark IV. Yeah, I don't know.
so.
EOS is what I've said. ISO.
Yeah, ISO.
Which one?
Pick your poison. I don't think anyone
think
really
it's-
cares. Tomato.
Yeah. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. I was gonna say some of the glass that they have, like the 20 to 70 for the L mount on the full
20 to 60
20 to
is
60.
that kit lens style.
Yes.
That's it doesn't have a constant aperture.
No, it's like a 3.5 to 5.6.
Correct.
And I like that focal range because that's something that we're both familiar with. Shooting the Micro Four Thirds equivalent roughly is the 10 to 25, which full frame equivalent is like 20 to 50. So a 20 to 60 is even better, right?
Right.
It's like, oh man, I still get that wide field of view, but then I also get like a nice, portrait-ish, style lens.
Right.
So it's something that I was like really stoked on, but then looking at, how fast it is, I'm like, this isn't fast at all. Like I could run faster than this. So it's just,
So if you do the math, because I've done this, and this is again why I sticking with Micro Four Thirds for the current point in time, that 10 to 25, beautiful, great lens, constant aperture, 1.7. That 1.7 is basically that
Like a
similar.
3.2.
You're right.
Yeah.
The depth of field is about the same. So even if
Yes.
you go like, oh, I'm going to get the S5 II
Mm-hmm.
with this 20 to 60, I'm going to get that full frame look. It's
Not with that lens.
not with that
Yeah.
lens. And they don't have a 20 to 50 that
Right.
is like an F2 or something that would actually make that meaningful
Yes.
difference
Yeah.
of that super shallow depth of field that you can get with full frame.
Which is why, shooting Sony or anything like that, I do have lenses that fit like that, not that wide, but there are lenses that suit me well.
Like a 2.8 or something.
There is one that came out. I think Tamron makes it. It's a 35 to 150 f2 to a 2.8, I believe.
Okay.
And that's amazing. Like I would love a lens like that because yeah, at a 35 millimeter, I would love to be at an f2. Like anything faster than that is kind of ridiculously pushing it, but like f2 is pretty solid. And then full on at like a 150 millimeter 2.8 looks great. That's almost too shallow. It's like, oh yeah, depending on how far your subject is. So lenses like that, where it's like the right focal length for again the kind of work that we do, which is more like docu style. And yeah, I guess I was just disappointed in like the initial offerings of the L mount class.
Yeah, well, it's new, and so there's that, and I hope they continue to develop it because I think it's a worthy system. Now, if you're worried about autofocus, if you're worried about full frame, those things are covered by Lumix, as well as all the other features that the Sony people don't realize they're missing, or the Canon people don't realize they're missing, or think that they want, but then Sony and Canon charge a premium for those things.
And there's one feature that I think only Canon has currently, which is it's like a phase detect, autofocus and everything, but specifically you can choose it to only focus on your face. So like even if you have your hands up and everything, it won't focus on your hands if your hands are like in front of your face. And something that you were talking about where you were saying that you don't like the autofocus because if you're focusing on someone's face and then they leave the frame, it'll just focus on the background.
Correct.
So that's something that if it's only tracking a face, if it doesn't see a face, it's not going to change focus.
It doesn't move.
So if you leave frame,
that's smart.
it just stays at that equivalent, depth that you were currently focused at. And then, if someone pops in frame, then it finds the face. So that's something that I feel like is a firmware upgrade potentially.
I have to do more testing because on the Lumix cameras now you can decide between human or face. So human detection will see faces and all that stuff, but it'll also detect bodies and heads and that kind of thing.
Yeah, you'll have to test that then. Like,
so
put
like
your hands in front.
Right. So if you put it in face mode, I don't know what it would do if you put your hand up or whatever.
Yeah.
But we could test it out and see on that G9 Mark II and see if it does
Yeah.
what I would want. But I think I don't know because I haven't tried the face mode because people say that it's kind of like it's good if you know you're going to film a face, but if you're filming people, it can be risky because let's say someone turns their head.
Yeah, and then it's just bouncing around.
And it's like, oh, I don't see a face anymore. I don't know what to do. So I have to do some more experimentation because it's all new. But it's a fun time because things just keep getting better. And they're certainly more affordable than they used to be 10 or 20 years ago.
So much more affordable.
When you're like, oh, I want to shoot 4K. Okay, we'll buy a red for 30 grand. Oh, I want to shoot RAW. Okay.
Well, the only irony is I feel like Sony cameras keep going up in price. Like my A7S III is more expensive now than when I bought it, which blows my mind. I'm like, really? This camera's been around for a few years now.
Yeah.
It shouldn't be that expensive. And then on the flip side, the Lumix, full frame cameras are so affordable.
Super
They're like,
affordable.
less than $2,000. So I'm just sitting here like, why would I pay $4,000 plus, for an FX3, whatever, when I could get this nice Lumix camera? But then I look at the lens selection, I'm like,
right.
But hopefully soon they'll change that because I don't think things are going to change necessarily format wise soon. I think vertical video is still going to be very commonly used as horizontal video. I know you made a video talking about how it's a fad. So
did you watch the video?
I did watch the video. I wonder because I know Canon has like I don't know if it's specifically like a spatial video lens, but it's like have you seen this lens where it has like two
lenses?
Two lenses.
It's a 3D lens. Yeah.
So it is interesting. I'm curious to see how many people will adopt the creation of that kind of content. Like it seems like a full-on investment. Like if you're going to make that kind of content like spatial videos, are you even making other content anymore? Or are you strictly
Oh,
like
yeah.
a spatial video content creator?
I don't know, but even in an environment where it's not 3D, it's not spatial. Even if I got my Apple Vision headset on or my Quest or whatever, and I go into like an immersed environment, like I want to watch a movie on a screen, I don't want it to be vertical. You
No,
know?
yeah, no.
So even because back in the day, Red's big mission was future proof your content. You're going to shoot 5K, you're going to shoot 6K, you're going to shoot 8K to future proof your
Yeah.
content. And now I look at people shooting vertical, and that is the least future proof format I can think of.
Yeah.
Because of all these advances in spatial video and whatnot. And just again, human biology. That's what I say in the video. Eyes are side by side horizontal. That's not going to change anytime soon. So I think you're throwing away the opportunity to capture future proofed content
Yeah.
if you're shooting vertical, especially if you're shooting like vertical 16 by 9 by 16. It's so wasteful, I think. There's people who want it. They expect you to shoot vertical because they're making a TikTok.
Right. Yeah.
But what happens if TikTok goes away?
Right. And I don't
And everyone's sitting there in their Apple Vision Pro, headset.
It is interesting how, like, we've been doing this for a while, like making content for multiple platforms, right? Shooting Open Gate. And we've been doing it for years at this point.
Yeah.
And recently I've been seeing people making YouTube shorts, and their like minds are blown, and they're just like, did you know you can shoot, like, you can turn your Sony camera on its side and shoot 4K vertical videos? And then I'm just like, well, obviously, like, how is that like a mind blowing, but it's like, well, yeah, you can also shoot open gate and capture both at once. It's like once people start figuring that out for real, their minds are going to be blown again. I know GoPro, like in their GoPro Hero 11 trailer video, they kind of addressed it because they were talking about how you can shoot in like a more open gate kind of scenario and then crop, and they kind of briefly went over it. And I'm like, they should really emphasize that more. But, I don't know, maybe nowadays, especially like content creators, like maybe if you're only invested in making TikToks, like, are you really going to be invested in making YouTube videos? Because for us, it seems like a pretty obvious thing to do because we provide the service of shooting. So for us, it makes sense to be like, well, yeah, I'm going to capture both horizontal and like vertical because it's just, of course, like, why wouldn't I? I have the ability to. But if you're a content creator who is established on TikTok, you're probably like, well, why would I waste my time trying to capture horizontally when I really only make my money vertically?
There are certain things that are so hard to explain in concept, and even if you show someone how to do it, they still don't have that light bulb moment until they do it themselves. The Sony versus Lumix stuff, just shutter angle alone, which I've talked about.
Sony still.
Shutter angle alone is so helpful as a cinematographer, as a shooter, if you're out there and you're switching frame rates, to know, all right, my shutter angle is set. I don't have to worry about my shutter speed. I don't have to think about it.
Right.
The mental relief of having that built in your camera.
Of not bumping it. For me, it's just like the accidental.
Well, right. Don't bump it.
Oops.
Yeah, don't bump it. But you don't have to think, oh, I'm switching to 60, so I got to change my shutter speed to be, 1/20, but I can't do that. I got to do 1/25, and it's like close enough, whatever. To not have to think about any of that. That alone is worth like choosing a camera shutter angle.
Yeah.
But if people don't know that they can do it and they've never operated that way, and they've only ever used shutter speed, it's like I'm speaking a different language. I'm trying to explain to them, look, I'm trying to wake you up. I think the same is true in a lot of these things in terms of open gate. You can explain, well, you get more vertical real estate. And they're like, yeah, but I just like crop my 16 by 9. Like, what's the big deal? And you go, no. I'm trying to wake you up. Like, you can get more resolution, more pixels. Your framing can be better
out of your camera.
Correct, because that's the shape of the sensor.
Exactly. Yeah.
But if you don't think about it, you don't understand it, you don't actually do it, you don't realize what you're missing. You go through those steps and you go, oh my God, I don't ever want to go back. Why would I ever turn my camera sideways? I can just shoot this way and get what
everything.
I need.
Yeah.
But you have to do it to actually understand that. And then you realize, oh yeah, I am being held back by this tool.
Yeah.
I thought it did everything I needed. I thought, the autofocus is great. I get it.
Yeah.
But like, look at what you're missing.
Yeah, they're going to be...
And it's forcing you to shoot certain ways that you don't have to.
I want to see the first camera with like the cross sensor. It's just a cross.
A cross? What do you mean? Like, oh,
Because we never ever use the corners.
Never the corners. Yeah, it's a wasted space.
Like wasted pixels.
Yeah, that's why I think they should just do square sensors.
Square. Yeah.
Yeah, just make it square.
Mm-hmm.
You don't have to turn your camera. It's just, even if you did turn your camera, it's the exact same. Who
You know,
cares?
I've always wondered why sensors weren't a circle.
It's more expensive to make them.
Lenses are
Yeah, it's more expensive to make a circular sensor.
right. Yeah.
It's easier to cut,
Mm-hmm.
but because they come from those big, the big ones, and they just chop them out.
Yeah.
From my layman's understanding of how they make sensors.
I mean, that would make sense. It was more of a joke, but because obviously I've rolled out some cookie dough before. I've cut out things from cookie dough.
But you are right. I mean, lenses are spherical, so a circular sensor makes the most sense.
It does. Well, I think the future is going to be, all around. Because for as much as you talk about like resolution, 4K, is it going to get to 8K? I don't think it's a necessity, especially for like looking at something directly in front of you.
Yeah.
But 8K, 24K, 36K, it's going to like multiply, not for something that you're looking, I think, directly in front of you, but probably more like 360, 180 view angles. I think that's where like the higher resolutions are going to come into play.
Yeah, you need it.
Well, right, you need it, but I think that's where it's going to be more like standardized when they're like, "Oh, did you get the new 130K, whatever?" It's like, "Oh yeah, I actually just got that, new Apple Vision 30,000K." Who knows?
Yeah, because even I think the Insta360s are like 5.7K, 5.8K.
Yeah.
That's what they're advertised as. But that's like enough to get you bad quality 1080p
Right.
from an export, like 16 by 9 export.
If you're
because it's-
picking that like portion of
Right.
the frame, which is a 360.
So if you want to crop out your, it's like 1080, but even then it looks like bad 1080. But
Right.
it's kind of what we have to operate with right now. But
Yeah.
I'm certain in the future it will be better. But they just have to shrink everything down. That's the hardest part with those new headsets, the Apple Vision Pro. The hardest part is making a screen that has pixels small enough that you can fit that many in front of your eyeball, which is crazy to think about.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting. I think, especially with like the way people make content, they're going to have to be a lot more comfortable with like the messiness that is a set. When you're watching this right now, it looks clean, right? You're talking about like what did they say? The mise en scène, right?
Like what's in the frame?
Actually in frame. And when, traditional filmmaking, it's like as long as what's in frame looks good, anything outside the frame can be just, light stands, right? All the junk that you need to actually make it look the way it does. But then when you're shooting 360, you can't hide anything.
Can't hide. Just the selfie stick. That's all
just
you
the stick. That's the one stick. That's the only thing. So it'll be interesting to see how people kind of adapt to how they create content and what they're like going to be okay with just like leaving in the room.
Probably everything nowadays. Like microphones have taken over frames.
You can just hold the microphone.
You can just hold the
out.
microphone.
You don't even have to hide microphones.
Any lav
anymore.
lapel
It's just
mic
like,
is meant to be held. I guess
that's like blows my
it's
mind.
a tiny little like, oh, that's what this is for. You hold a microphone.
I think they're gonna change like the trajectory of what a microphone looks like because no one tries to hide them anymore. They're gonna be like, yeah, it's just a handle. It's formed to grip. It's gonna look like just like a
Something appealing to look at. The tiny mics. Well,
yeah.
this was fun. We should do it again sometime.